threat of nuclear annihilation.
A series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on the island of Cuba.
With the Cuban Missile Crisis escalating and visions of mushroom clouds, a top-secret fallout shelter in West Virginia stood at the ready.
That's one small step for man.
In their children's time, if not in our own time.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Our Generation, sponsored by AARP.
I'm at the beautiful Greenbrier Resort in West Virginia, which is about a 4-hour drive from Washington, D.C. It's hard to believe, but beneath these quiet and serene grounds is one of the most powerful reminders of the Cold War. It's a massive bomb shelter built for members of Congress in the event of a nuclear attack on Washington, D.C. It's a reminder that our generation was the first generation to grow up facing the prospect of nuclear annihilation. The very day that President Kennedy saw photos of Cuban missile sites in 1962, the Greenbrier's top-secret fallout shelter, codenamed Operation Greek Island, opened here in West Virginia. Greenbrier historian, curator, and archivist Bob Conti was uniquely qualified to take me back in time. I have to tell you, the one thing that strikes me is this place is massive. How did you ever manage to build this place and keep it a secret?
Well, they utilized a technique called hiding it in plain sight. They built it right in front of everybody's nose and called it something else. So specifically what they did was build two buildings at one time, a secret underground bunker and an above-ground addition to the Greenbrier.
Then you mean it is possible for them to have built such a thing?
Mr. President, the technology required is easily within the means of even the smallest nuclear power. It requires only the will to do so.
Want to go inside?
Sure, let's go in. I'll show you something here. Whoa. Now this is a cover door. And the purpose of this cover door is to cover
this door,
the real door,
which is
the entrance to the bunker.
How much does that weigh?
That weighs 25 tons. This is a door that was manufactured by the Mosler Safe Company. This is essentially a giant oversized bank vault door.
Now what about these air vents up here?
Those poppets were in fact connected to blast detectors on the mountains around here. So if a blast occurred nearby, they would automatically close.
So how do you get inside a 25-ton door?
Should be no problem.
This is moving fairly easily. Look how thick this is. This has got to be over a foot thick.
It's 18 inches thick, and the trick is the hinges. It swings very easily on those hinges.
Jeez, you feel a little claustrophobic being in here. You're definitely inside a bunker. So let me ask you this. It's October 1962.
Right.
I'm a congressman. President Kennedy decides that the Cuban Missile Crisis has escalated and he's going to evacuate the Capitol. How do I get from there to here?
This was a resort that had its own private airport. About a mile to the west was a landing strip. The train was an option. In later years, they're going to build an Interstate 64 that goes right next to us.
And how much time was it estimated it would take for me to get from my office to here?
3 to 4 hours.
And every congressperson was allowed to bring one aide, is that right?
Right.
No family members, no spouses, no children.
As time went on, they made arrangements. Part of the hotel was developed, which was like an annex to the bunker. So altogether, you would have accommodations here for 1,600 people.
Okay, so I'm a congressman. I just arrived here. I've come in through the door. Let's continue my journey.
Certainly, this way.
When you're actually raised under the threat of the bomb, it's so large a threat, so potentially devastating, that it becomes kind of unreal.
I never was worried about nuclear weapons, probably because I was so young and it didn't seem real. I mean, I didn't really have a conception of everything just blowing up. But we did do the rituals.
There was a turtle by the name of Bert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered.
Well, Duck and Cover, it was made in 1951 by Archer Films.
Duck and cover.
They said, here's what you do. You get under your desk and you put your hands over the back of your neck like this and hold your head down like that, and you'll be fine.
The idea of a cartoon character leading kids to safety when we know what an atomic bomb would do to a city, it's sort of ludicrous.
Miraculously bypass our school and move on and destroy the entire city.
I think today kids might be a lot more questioning about what good does this do, but we didn't then.
This is the ultimate duck and cover. This is where the government would duck and cover.
That principle on a giant scale, on sort of on steroids here, so that instead of a desk, you have this giant concrete box. That's really what we're going to go into, a giant concrete shoebox underground. When everything else had failed, then you turn to this. If members of Congress were walking down this corridor, cataclysm was upon us.
And how many members of Congress actually knew this place existed?
4. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, the Minority Leader, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Minority Leader of the Senate.
Do we know now, knowing all that we know at the end of the Cold War, whether the Soviets knew about this place?
The best information we have is that they did not know about it and they never targeted it.
With the destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki bringing about an end to World War II, the atomic Pandora's box was opened. The world forever changed. The U.S. nuclear monopoly ended in 1949, and with the atomic ante constantly being upped, civil defense at home was in for some changes.
Originally, all these fallout shelters date back to bomb shelters. They date back to World War II. As bombs went from atomic bombs to hydrogen bombs, it became, well, you can't really build a bomb shelter, in the blast zone. You have to look beyond that. What do you have to worry about? And it's the aftermath, it's fallout. The fallout shelter sign was a prominent emblem of the duck and cover era. It was those yellow signs, and those still appear on buildings that haven't been removed. And most of the fallout shelters have been decommissioned.
So we've just walked down this 400-foot hallway, and this is the first place we come to.
Right, no matter who you are, everybody stops here. They're going to remove their clothing, and they're going to put it right down this chute. People are terrified while all this is happening.
And this is not your typical shower.
No, it's very high pressure, it's warm water, and you just want to get that radiation off of you.
They're not with their families.
They're not clear what is going to happen. They've never been in this bunker before. They don't know what they're coming into. At this point, you're issued new clothing, nothing exotic at all. Footwear, socks, 2 pairs, and you're going to have military fatigues. You're going to have a little bag of toiletries, and you're also going to get a lock and a key. You've been assigned to a bunk. When you get there, you're going to have 1 drawer to store your personal.
Not a whole lot of privacy. Well, take me to my bunker.
All right down through here.
Throughout the 50s and early 60s, the arms race continued to escalate. With the development of the hydrogen bomb, the launch of Sputnik, and the downing of Gary Power's U-2 spy plane, the Cold War was heating up.
The fear of nuclear confrontation really came to a head with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and everybody felt it.
Well, boys, I reckon this is it. Nuclear combat toe-to-toe with the Ruskies.
The Cuban Missile Crisis is a 14-day crisis, during most of which the American public is unaware of what's going on.
At its beginning, this day looked as though it might be one of armed conflict between Soviet vessels and American warships on the sea lanes leading to Cuba.
It had been rumored in the days just prior to the announcement that they had fired off the weapon. We realized we were living in a more dangerous world than we had been just a few minutes before.
The Greenbrier bunker became fully operational the very day President Kennedy was briefed on Cuban missile sites in October 1962. As we continued our tour, I discovered the realities of life underground had the Cold War actually escalated into full-scale nuclear war. So this is not exactly sort of the lap of luxury here.
Right, as one person described it, had the creature comforts of a World War II submarine.
Medical care? What kind of medical care?
A whole separate area was for the medical care. They had an intensive care unit. They had a dental unit.
Well, let's continue. This place is fascinating.
Sure.
So this is obviously the cafeteria where people would eat. This place had to be fully stocked at all times. You need to have enough food to feed 1,000 people for, what, 60 days?
Yes. And the way that was done was through the Greenbrier's food storeroom staff. So there were Greenbrier employees who were cleared to do that sort of thing. You could hide all sorts of restocking, replenishing of the bunker in the larger maintenance of the Greenbrier Hotel.
And there were some people who worked here who were disguised as TV repairmen, is that right?
We set up a shop within the hotel itself called FAMS, Forsyth Associates Maintenance Shop.
Becoming the on-site manager of the Greenbrier Congressional Relocation Center in 1971, Fritz Buyugas and his FAMS team were primarily communication specialists, but they also maintained the overall readiness of the bunker.
We worked in accordance with Greenbrier hours, and we were assimilated into the Greenbrier. More than anything, we were just accepted as Greenbrier employees.
The lease contract between the government and the C&O Railway Company, which owned the Greenbrier, stated that the government could only take over the facility in the event of war.
We were tenants through the Greenbrier, so we wouldn't have to own anything. We wouldn't have to get into any sort of a paper trail where somebody could come back and say, aha, the government owns this, that, or the other.
According to Buyugas, the heart and soul of the bunker was the power plant. To power the facility, 45,000 gallons of diesel fuel was kept in storage.
But once you used that diesel up, that was it.
Begging the question, where did the government go next?
The best thing I can say is, hey, it worked. What more proof do you want? For 30 years it worked.
For the life of the bunker, communications was considered nearly as vital as power. Up until 1993, when Project Greek Island was compromised, the capability of the communications area remained cutting edge.
Steve, now we're in the communications room. If you're a politician, this is a high priority. And we've walked into essentially a television studio right here. And this backdrop of the Capitol is where Senator Smith or Congressperson Jones could tape a message that would go back to their constituents. And the idea of this picture was to reinforce the message, Congress has reassembled.
A lot of thought went into this.
Exactly.
I mean, people sat down and spent a lot of time.
Not only survival, but really key, how the legislative branch of the federal government could continue to function. Of the bunker was open to the public for the entire history of the project.
Experiencing the bunker is a sobering reminder of how America lived with and prepared for the possibility of a Soviet nuclear attack. However, there were individuals who faced that fear on a daily basis. Here at the Greenbrier, I spoke with two missileers who were on the front line when this facility became operational. Terry Carcelis was based in an active squadron in Roswell, New Mexico. Paul Lenich served in the 395th Strategic Missile Squadron at Vandenberg Air Force Base. As signified by his uniform, one of his duties included training silo crews. So you both were in missile silos?
I was in an active squadron. That meant that we were ready to go to war.
You'd go to work every day knowing that there was a possibility that that was the day that you were going to have to release our missiles and perhaps ignite a nuclear war.
For all intents and purposes, yeah.
Do you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yes, definitely. Well, we started, we were sitting at a DEFCON 5 or 6. DEFCON 1 means war. DEFCON 5 and 6 are in the lesser amounts of war, I guess you could say. We had to take all our training gear off the missile, replace it with a nuclear warhead, and place that missile in DEFCON 2 position.
And what happens in DEFCON 2 then?
DEFCON 2 usually means death to us, because we're the ones throwing it at them.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
On the morning of October 16, 1962, the President asked me to come into his office and told me that U-2 overflight planes had detected on the island of Cuba, only 90 miles from our shores, the beginnings of Soviet nuclear missile bases.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
They had been rushed in under cover of secrecy and deception, and that is why the President was determined upon their removal.
A strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated.
There was a sense in which this was it. This was the confrontation that everybody had been afraid of.
People thought if we send the missile, it's going to take us a couple hours to get it ready, and we'll send it over at our convenience, or the Russians' convenience, when we were actually 14 minutes away from nuclear holocaust.
And you knew that every day you went to work knowing that?
Particularly during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. I think most people went about their lives not realizing how close we were to devastation.
How close were we?
How close were we? God knows, I hope.
In 1992, when the public learned for the first time of the existence of the shelter here at the Greenbrier, many Americans hoped that we would never again have to live in fear of our government being attacked. Tragically, we found that was not true.
We understand that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center.
I think if you grow up in a generation that experienced 9/11 as children, that's a much different fear, because it's random and it's senseless.
Tower was hit by an incoming aircraft.
Today it's personal. Back in the 60s, you didn't know where it was going to start. It was more impersonal.
With the end of the Cold War, many baby boomers felt they had dodged the nuclear bullet.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Today, the players may be different, but the threat remains. I went to the World Trade Center site in New York. There I was joined by two boomers and their children to understand how they live with Cold War tensions and the level of threat that exists today. So tell me about your memories of the Cuban Missile Crisis.
It was just this sense that everything that the Cold War represented was coming to a head, and this was this defining moment.
So how did that shape the way you viewed 9/11?
Well, it wasn't an immediate connection. Standing on the bridge, looking back at the smoke pouring up from the site, what I felt was the anger that my daughter was going to have to grow up feeling the same kind of fear that I felt.
Definitely. I'd never experienced anything like that day.
When I was growing up, we had an identifiable enemy. We had another country. There were two superpowers, and we finally broke up the Soviet Union, and we really believed this, that we fell into some kind of complacency. And that's why we felt so angry, because we're totally unprepared for it.
They tried to get us in '93. I mean, we should have known right then and there that we were vulnerable. If you can drive a truck full of explosives into the World Trade, maybe this might be something they're trying to get.
Do you think that growing up during the Cold War prepared us for 9/11?
I don't think anything could have prepared us, but I'm hopeful, and I do see signs that what it's done is to allow us to look at it with a clearer perspective. I don't want her to live with the same fear that I lived under. What I'm hopeful about is that they're much more sophisticated, they're much more aware.
There's always hope, when you have young people that are willing to take a stand and will be vigilant, in terms of taking us to that next step.
Proliferation around the world is the horror and terror of our time. We've got not even full nations that have the access to nuclear weapons.
I think there's reason to worry now, because now essentially you have portable nukes detonated anywhere, you know, downtown Manhattan, a middle America shopping mall.
It is a different type of warfare, and I think that maybe since 9/11 there has been some rethinking.
Our generation grew up in the shadow of the Cold War. For all the fear and uncertainty it produced, the Cold War imposed a sense of order. Our victory in the Cold War created a new world and sowed the seeds of